Welcome, everyone, to the December 11th special meeting of the board. This is a public workshop on an enrollment update, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Copeland.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. Before I introduce our two demographers, just by way of recalling for everybody, I know the board is aware, this is the second time that we've engaged two demographers, and this is an experience or a strategy that I've used in the past. We wanted to triangulate data to try and get the best possible results and inform the board as we move forward. We also typically ask these folks to give a presentation. The board has a draft copy of each one of their lengthy reports. The reports will become final when the board releases them and has no further questions about them. So some folks asked for them ahead of time. We typically don't do that. One time we sort of broke our rule with that, was the feasibility or the needs assessment, and then we had to collect them and send them back and so forth and so on. So the objective is see what these folks have to say. We will then, if the board has no more questions or asks for no more input, then we will release them within the next couple of days as completed reports. With that, the first enrollment study is by Sundance Associates, Incorporated, whatever you are, Associates. Mr. Sundell?
Need to do slideshow, don't we? So I think many of you, certainly on the board and also even in the audience, probably know our work from the previous study that we did last year. So we are a bit familiar with the district, and the enrollment this year really was what one would more or less call an update to the previous one. Just by way of introduction, though, I would tell you that I was a math major at the University of Connecticut before studying architecture and planning at Drexel University, and I was a licensed architect in New Jersey for many years, but my practice, for the most part, really was planning assignments, again, mostly for school districts, so I did an awful lot of long-range facility planning, and that did include doing the enrollment projections for the district. The primary method used almost everywhere in the United States is what's called cohort survival method, or sometimes an alternate name for the very same thing as grade level progression. You will find that name used in Pennsylvania sometimes. But it pretty much is based on historical data, both for enrollments, and again, generally one uses 6 years of enrollment data, and birth information. And the birth information, again, comes from an official source, which is Pennsylvania Department of Health, and they give you month by month birth data. As it is for our studies, the County Planning Commission has access to data which is not just on a municipal basis, which is what is available to most consultants. They have it on a geographic basis, so we have shared that information, and our birth data used in both of our studies is based on geography related to the school attendance areas at the elementary level. Now, sometimes they're modified, and if they are, that's generally for the impact of some unusually increased amount of residential construction, which of course is the case here in Lower Merion. So that modification is made. We don't find too many changes happening in private and parochial. Those trends, in other words, there is a slight decrease in parochial education, but we imagine that trend is continuing. The charter and school choice programs seem to be stable. You don't come into seasonal fluctuations such as itinerant farmers or that sort of thing. So again, down to the bottom of this slide, we are mostly doing changes relative to the impact of your construction. And I would simply say at this point that it's important to differentiate between the type of housing there was in the past in Lower Merion and what is to come. In the past, there were primarily single-family houses, duplexes, and some very small, smallish, at least in the last 10 years, multifamily housing. Most of the housing, all of it now is mid-rise condominiums, luxury in nature. So, sometimes you take the level of housing in the past and subtract it from that level of future housing. But I anticipate that level of the past types of housing continuing, and all the new housing is something new, and I have added the impact of all the housing into my projections. So everyone knows, where you are located in Montgomery County and pretty much the schools and the districts. There's a lot of schools here. There's 10 schools, and you are, in terms of relativity to neighboring school districts, have a rather large enrollment. And if we look at that enrollment, since the year 2000, we can see that except for 2 years, it has been a gradually increasing enrollment. However, it should be important to bear in mind that back in the early 2000s, you were growing at a rate of about 100 students per year. And you dipped at the beginning of the recession, 2007, 2008. There was a little bit of a stall in your growth. However, it rapidly gained momentum again, and in the last few years has been increasing at the rate of about 150 students per year. So that's a significant difference from the beginning of the 2000s, like 17 years ago, believe it or not. Another thing that we look at sometimes, just to get a better feel for what's happening in the district, is how many students come from the available housing, or in this case, this is really based on occupied housing, and the number is from the 2010 census divided by the number of your students. And we can see at that time there was 0.296 students from every occupied housing. Adding the housing that has been permitted, or again, should use the word occupied, since then to arrive at a 2016 number of occupied houses, we now find that number of students from a unit has risen to 0.335. So again, that also is increasing. It just adds fuel to the fire, if you will, and supports why we're having these increasing enrollments. An additional factor to look at is percent of population. Again, if we go all the way back to beginning of 2000, we would find that the enrollment in the public school system was 10% of the population. That rose right after the recession to about 11.6, and is now standing closer to 13.4% of the population is in the public school. So we kind of see, no matter what measure we look at right now, it's an increasing enrollment and an increasing percent of population, and there are more students in each of the available units. So births, of course, is one of the primary, if you will, movers of our enrollment projection, because it is our jumping off point in a cohort survival projection. We start with births and look at how many students are in kindergarten 5 years later, and it gives us our first cohort survival ratio. That's the birth to kindergarten ratio. So births become very, very important. The blue line is, of course, the actual births in the two townships combined. The yellow line is the trend, and we can see if we look at a 6-year trend, there is an upward trend for live births, but we don't use that. The methodology calls for an average. And so the average in this case of the last 6 years, we use 6 years because it's the same 6 years, if you will, the same 6-year period, as the number of years of historic information that we're using for enrollment. So in the last 6 years, our average is 559 students. In our 5-year projection, there's only a year or two where we have to use an average because we don't yet know those numbers, the births, they haven't been born yet. So that's where we use the average for the 4th and 5th year of our projection. Prior to that, we have actual birth numbers, so it becomes a fairly a real number that we know are driving these enrollments. So one of the other things that we looked at was residential sales, and this is a chart with yellow on the bottom for Narberth and blue for Lower Merion, giving us the line at the top, which is how residential sales turned over, existing housing turnover in the township. So you can see back at the beginning of our period here of, I think it's 2007, am I looking at that right? We were up in the 897 numbers, and we very early went down into that trench for that housing recession, all the way down to the 605 number, but it rebounded quickly. After 2008, we came out and we were back to that same level, another little bit of a dip, and we are currently in a little bit higher right now, but then we have more housing. It probably is the same percentage of available housing that is turning over. So it's important to see that some of the residential sales information transfers itself into the enrollments. So if we looked, and we look here at a delta, the change in the number of units of residential sales and the change in the number of students, we can see that right through 2005-06, there was a significant correlation between the two. Just another piece of information to, if you will, understand what's happening. Now, since we've had the more active permitting for new housing, the chart, in fact, loosens up, and we don't see such a strong correlation. I don't know what to say about that, honestly, and we'll look for another year or two of information before we can start talking about a strong correlation again. So this is what the past residential permitting looked like. This tells us how many new projects came before the board and they were approved. So we see peaks, back quite a few years ago. Then we had doldrums in the residential recession, which we find out really hit new construction more than it did the turnover of existing homes. Nonetheless, we all are aware that recently we've had many more units permitted, and we jumped back up to like the 300 level back in 2006.
Can I just ask a definition of term?
Sure.
So residential permitting, is that a unit of housing? Is that a house? Is apartment building one, or is an apartment building the number?
No, apartment building is how many apartments are in it.
Okay, so
And
that's...
a twin is 2. So it is really how many residential units.
So it could be 50 apartments and 3 houses and one number, and they all...
That number will be 50. If there's 50 units in it, the permit will be for 50. So we know that there was some increase in permitting here, and we also know, in fact, that there is more to come. We tally up a list, and I've come up with 16 projects that are going to involve over 1,600 units, and that is between 2018 and 22. If they were permitted earlier and unoccupied, not yet built, not occupied, they are on this list. But if they've been built and occupied, they are not on the list. This is how many units will be occupied and when they will be occupied. You can't see it, but the big table is for several years out. We have conversations with the developers and the owners and ask them, so you got an approval, what does it look like? How long does it take to prepare the ground? When do you think, based on market conditions, you're going to start selling or renting or whatever? And so the schedule of these units over the next 4 or 5 years is based on conversations with the developers. And that's what the chart now looks like. You have the same history in green, and comparatively speaking, how many units are coming on live for the future. You can see that there is a significant difference. And we map them in order to find out what attendance area they will be for in the elementary and middle schools. And we use those number of units and multiply them out, if you will, by what are called school-age children multipliers. I use the numbers that show up in Rutgers University study for the state of Pennsylvania. So they are numbers used everywhere in the Commonwealth. But again, Rutgers does numbers for New Jersey. They do numbers for Connecticut. They do individual state numbers. And these are what they found to be true in Pennsylvania, and in this case, for the type of housing we have coming up, there are 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments, 1 and 2 bedroom condos, some townhouses, and some singles. Now, each of these housing types by bedroom count has a different factor. That's how deep their study is, and those are the numbers I use. I use a standard methodology, and I use a standard count, a standard source, if you will, for the school age multipliers in my study. There's a chart, then you'll find it in the final study, that shows that over the next 4 years, there's first 75 students being added from new housing. In the second year, 125, then 33, and then 37. Now, that's a total of 272 students over 4 years. If we divide that by 4 years, we can see the average from this new housing is 70 students per year, okay? If you just remember the conversation we had a few minutes ago, most recently, we're nearly up to 200 students per year in annual growth. Had nothing to do with this new housing that's coming through. That's how it was growing without this unusual amount of new housing in this new type of housing, mid-rise luxury condominiums. So what are we going to do? We're going to, review where we are. We can see that school year births has recently been volatile, but the 6-year trend of 9 additional births per year, but if you remember, we're using averages. If the trend stays that way, however, we'll see a slight increase in some of our kindergarten classes as a result of it. So we're using the 559 average because that's what the methodology is. And the reason for that, it's important to understand it is this could be the trend today, but in fact, next year could be the very year in which something turns and starts going downward. So the best way to be accurate is to be slow and steady and use that average number. And you kind of move away then from disruptions in the cycle. So we saw that there were 16 developments, 1,600 housing units, and a possible 272 students from new housing. And we saw they were going to be distributed over the years. So we saw that, in comparatively speaking, we were seeing an average really of over 200 students per year in the last 6 years. And the average from new housing is going to be about 70. So we may see an increase in that somewhere between the 200 and the 300 that we're talking about, because there was all that built-in trend from other reasons, and now we have this significant increase in housing. And we looked at a couple other factors, that students per occupied unit and students as a percent of population, and they also were both all increasing. But the last thing to note was, despite all these things that we're saying that the average was 200, last year's increase was only 41 students. Now, this means that we need to keep our bifocals on, if you will, and look at the details as the year goes on. And again, it probably means it calls for looking at enrollments next year to see what really happens. Most of this cohort survival method is based on trends moving on in the future as they have in the past. And this was a disruption to only have 41 student increase from the, a year ago to this past October. It's hard to say why. It's hard to say why that. It could be just another year of a little blip before it continues on, as there was back in 7 or 18. We don't know. It needs to be, you need to keep your finger on the pulse, if you will. So we did a small review. For the audience's benefit, I'll just tell you that this is in the stand-up oval, all the births 5 years earlier. In the going across oval, those are the actual enrollment projections. So this is the data input section of a cohort survival projection. We make calculations then, if you look at that red slanted oval, of 185 students being in a kindergarten, showing up as 239 in first grade, gives us a 1.292 survival rate of kindergarten to first grade. Then those 239 students become 247, and we have a new first grade to second grade survival rate, and it's in the next year as we move down that chart, 1.033. So what we have is we make these calculations as 5 survival rates from kindergarten to first grade, first to second, and we do an average of them. And that's what's in those blue circles at the bottom. We calculate a new 5-year average, and those numbers then become the survival rate for kindergarten to first grade, first to second, and we use them in multiplying out the base year, which is the 2000. Well, in our case, this chart is not your chart. This is a sample chart. Last year on your enrollment is 17-18, and we multiply those out. So this shows you how the methodology works. Now, we're also talking about new housing, and I do an overlay method on the very same projection, but if there was 13 new units coming next year, I divide it by the 13 grade levels, and I add 1 student to each grade level. Of course, if it's 75 students, I divide 75 by 13, and that is how many are added to each grade level. So the new students from new housing are evenly distributed over all grade levels. There might actually be slight differences that the elementary levels would have a weighted difference. It's minute and not worth the detail, going into the detail of it. And so then we arrive finally, using that methodology, at an enrollment projection for the next 5 years. The blue is your historical information, the red is your 5-year projection, and the green is kind of a 6 to 10 year projection that's highly unreliable. We do it just to see what direction it might be going in, but as you've heard me say in the past, cohort survival projections are reliable plus or minus 1% per year. So next year's projection ought to be really close, plus or minus 1%, but you can't fault anyone when the projection 5 years out is plus or minus 5%. That is the, if you will, cone of growth that you work with in an enrollment projection situation. So if all things continue to remain as they are, the enrollment, which is now 8,810, will move on up to 9,594. That is a continued increase at about 200 students per year. So knowing that everything had continued at 200 in a standard projection and that we're adding on average about 70 per year from new housing, then we can see that the rate from all the ordinary trends is probably around 130. The enrollment was slowing down, okay, because we're continuing with a 200 student increase per year on average. Any questions on that one? We know that housing is adding on average about 70. It was 200 in the recent past before the housing came on board, and it's continuing at that same rate of 200. So 130 would be the number. If we didn't have all this new housing come by, we would have seen increases only on the order of about 130. So in the study, you'll also find that there are elementary level projections, and we can see some increases there, but the increases in the elementary school are slower than in some of the middle school or the high school. And also for each one of the projections on a grade level basis, you have a table showing the individual grade levels year by year by year, and that's both historic and in the future. It gives you some averages during the period, growth or decreases in red there, and tells you a percentage growth on the other end. So as I said, we do those also then for 6 to 8, and there's growth in both periods. This is increasing 291 students, and it's only 3 grade levels. So each of those grade levels is increasing about 100 over the period of the projection in 5 years. And finally, we look at high school, and this is where the increases are the largest. 570 students, that's in 4 grades, so it's plus 100, 125 perhaps, 120 per grade level in the next 5 years. And here is a comparative, where the numbers are is the end of the 5-year projection, and we can see that the growth that led up there. The Blue elementary seems to have the last few years of leveling off, and the green 9 to 12 is quite increasing there during this period. And we find the middle school to be moderate between those two in terms of its increases. Besides the district and then these grade level organizations, we also do individual projections, and this is where the information that we have on births by elementary attendance area comes into play. And so we have fairly well-defined growth charts for each of the individual schools. And this happens to be Kenwood, and you would see that on each of these charts it'll also tell you how many students are being added in this geography in that individual school. So this is how the individual schools are presented, and also have individual tables. It would be quite boring to go over each one, so I'm just going to do a summary then of those findings. And as you can see that Belmont Hills is projected to actually decrease over that 5-year projection period. All the rest of them are increasing, with Gladwin and Penwyn seeing the most significant, Marion, I'm sorry, the most significant increases. So the number under historic, for those of you who are reading the chart, is that during the 6-year historic period, Belmont Hills increased 59 students. But in the next 5-year projection period, it's going to decrease by 3. Kenwood, which had increased 32 students in the 5 historic years, is going to increase, but by a lesser amount of 19 in the next 5 years. And then the middle chart is how many students are in fact coming from new housing during that next 5-year projection period. And then we have a chart for historic averages. But as we can see, except for Belmont Hills, they're all increasing to some extent. At the middle school level, we see much larger increases. In Ballykinwood, we saw increases of 119 during the historic period, and it's going to increase by a larger 174. Welsh Valley saw 134, and it has a lesser increase during the projection period of 123. Again, more students are coming from new housing into Ballykinwood than to Welsh Valley. And finally, we look at the high schools. The change at Harrington was only 19 students in the 6-year historic period, and it's going to be 261, big increase. And Lower Merion, which was 196, is going to increase 310. The largest increases are at the high school level. And it's not because new housing either. You can see there's only 21 new students for new housing at Harrington and 62 in Lower Merion. That concludes the formal presentation, and I think that questions now or later.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I am going to open up to some questions right now because I think people have them. Does anybody have a question right now? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to understand, and in terms of the new housing, are you looking at the new housing that's been built as of now? And then when you're projecting how much the new housing is going to add to our student population, are you looking into what's coming in development?
So we talked to the town planning officials to discuss, what's been approved this year or even a few years back in order to find what has not been built. And of course, there's records, and we do look at all of that. So we look at all the unbuilt housing or projects currently under construction. Now, what I had said was if they're under construction and they've already delivered, let's say they're doing 3 buildings ultimately, and one is built and occupied, and it was before the start of the school year, then we are not looking at those in terms of adding them.
Right.
But if they are for the future and to be occupied in the future, then they are added in. Now, if your question has to do with, did we look at some of these recent occupancies to find out how many students are coming from those units. No, I did not. I am using those Rutgers study numbers for the building type and number of bedrooms, and not any field survey numbers or anything.
Okay. And my other question is, can you explain, just for those watching and in the room, why the K-5 enrollment rate remains the same from year 5 on? You have, that's just from year 2022 on, you have the same number going forward?
So what we really have, I don't know if you've heard the, I forget what was the metaphor we used last time. Some people
Yeah.
do the pig and the python going through your school district. Right now, your largest class size is at the high school level. Let me just look here. Where the class sizes are about the middle schools. The high school is like 672 right now, average class size. Middle school is 687. And the elementary is 639. So let's say we're at 640, 690, and 670. It's a little bit easier to look at those numbers. We can see where the pig is in terms of the python, and right now it's in the middle, at the middle school. So we would expect high school to continue to grow, and elementary, which has already, the classes have already shrunk a little bit. Not that enrollment isn't still strong and continuing to increase, but the class sizes have shrunken down, where they're at the 640 level. Now, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that is why you will continue to see some flatness. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that without new housing, you might have even seen, you would have seen more decreases, but that's probably the case at the elementary level. But you do have the new housing. I mean, it's coming, it's permitted, it's for the most part under construction. Ground is being cleared, and so, you will have the new housing.
But as I understand, Mrs. Robinson, your concern was there's a leveling off or dropping off at the elementary level, yet at the middle school and high school, those green numbers are showing more fluctuation. And I think, George, what you're saying is because some of those students in those out years are already in the schools.
Oh, they're absolutely here, right?
Yeah.
For middle school and high school, they're here and they're definitely moving forward.
And when you're dealing with the younger grades, because for some of those grades there hasn't been a birth record,
You got some
it's much
averages
more
of averages that- yeah.
averages of averages.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a related question to Ms. Robinson's. So in terms of when we're thinking about the flattening of the elementary grades, students are coming in new then to both the middle and the high schools? Is that what we're suggesting?
Well, there's a combination really of both. We're telling you that we're putting new students in from new housing and we're adding them.
Okay.
But we're also telling you that the rate of survival from one year to the next is different. If I were to, I really can't tell you quickly. But the survival rates are such that growth may be in one segment. Let's say that the middle school survival rates are all a little bit higher than the elementary level. That might mean that some kids went to a parochial school for the first 4 years,
Okay.
and now they want better or different, I should say, socialization or athletic opportunities. They think they might get them in the public school system or higher academic excellence. But people will change, and so we do find an influx of students.
So we're still having the same number going through, but rather there are additional students coming in?
Well, or even an increase because those cohort survival ratios are a little bit higher there.
Okay, and then my second question is, do you make any adjustments for the natural entry point at K and 1, given that our students come in at both kindergarten because we have half-day as well as first grade? Or does that calculation still remain the same given the natural entry point?
Right, you have one survival rate from kindergarten to first grade and another then from first to second.
Okay.
And the first to second is like 145%.
Okay,
And the
Got it.
kindergarten to birth, I'm sorry, am I looking at the K? I think it's the birth to kindergarten number, is only around 75%.
Okay.
Because people, yes, keep their kids in daycare,
Sure.
paid for daycare and that sort of thing. It's just easier and it's all day, and there's reasons for them not to come in.
sure.
You have to come into a public system or a private system in grade 1, and so then they make the decision, and that's when they come over. But it's accounted for.
Okay, great,
accounted
thank
for.
you. Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. I guess I'm going to go off of a slide number, slide 12. I don't know if you can, that helps me.
Well,
If you can,
It's titled residential permitting.
which one
History.
is it?
residential permitting history, it's got a red, there you go, that's it, right there. I guess I'm looking at the table at the bottom. I mean, I'm assuming the large spikes are approvals of large apartment buildings. I mean, they didn't issue 300 single-family detached
Oh,
permits.
absolutely, right. That's
But-
the first of your multifamily.
However, I'm asking, I guess in like 2008, 9, 10, 11, when we only had 40 to 20 units, I mean, maybe they approved, the townships or borough approved a 20-unit apartment building, not a large, but some of this is single-family detached houses or single-family attached houses. Isn't that most of
Yeah,
what
I'm
there's?
not showing it here, and there was multifamily units in those numbers. I do have that information, but not with me.
Because I guess where I'm going with this is, even though the large units are coming in recently, we've still had this development of single-family detached homes. Like, we're adding 10 to 12 single-family detached homes as they subdivide some lots. Some vacant lots are just getting improved for the first time.
Right.
So over 5 to 10 years, you will have 50 to 100 single-family detached homes today that we didn't have 10 years ago, or something like that, yes?
Yes, and one assumes that trend isn't going up or down, it's staying the same. And therefore, let's just say the number was 45 per year during that period. We expect the 45 to continue, but its impact, because it's been having felt now for much longer than the 6 years of our historic enrollment, but the impact is built into those cohort survival rates for about 45 units. That's why I said, normally, I in fact subtract what that historic rate has been from the level I use in the future, but I did not do it in this case because the nature of the housing for the future is significantly different than what we've seen in the past. So I used it all, because that will continue. Your 45 number will continue.
Okay. No, actually, I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Okay, so first, just to follow up on that specific question, with the individual detached houses, some of them are new, but a lot of them are tear downs of old and rebuilds. Is that, are they both treated the same? Whether it's a new?
Well, it's treated as a new, and because I do not take the time. It's usually now to subtract out demolitions. It's like minute compared with the total number of houses.
Although in
the
a
area.
mature area like this, we sometimes get one torn down and two put
built,
up.
right.
But you're
I do
counting that
understand
as two rather than one, and so.
Correct.
It does sort of throw the numbers off a little bit.
It does, yes.
And again, to follow up on Suba's question, you said you used the Rutgers numbers as the multipliers for
Correct.
how many, which are not the same necessarily as, say, the county numbers or the local numbers, correct?
Correct.
And do you know, are they higher or lower, or you just don't, you don't know what our local numbers are?
No, I think I've looked at them not so recent, like in the last week or two, but I believe the local numbers or the county numbers are less.
Okay, so that.
Fewer children from each of the housing types.
Okay, so that could also throw the numbers off a little bit.
Right,
maybe.
and
And I
think
know this is not an exact science.
it's not an exact science, and I don't know, I don't know that we've had this new, I call it mid-rise because of the number of stories, luxury housing, to really do field surveys or even really feel comfortable with our numbers. So I would rather use a standard number.
And we have heard in the past that it's much easier to project grosser, bigger numbers than it is smaller numbers. So,
Correct.
so individual buildings are much harder to project than elementary grade level, or then I would assume you take that a step further. It may be easier or more accurate to project the total student population in the district and where that's going versus building by building and where that's going.
Right. I think the proper way to say that would be your district projection will be more accurate
Okay.
than will the building level projections.
Now, the district projection that you're giving us, is that a district projection, or is that based on each individual school projection and then combined to give us a?
No, it's a district projection.
So the
And-
district projection's not, if we were to take each individual building and add those totals up, they're not going to equal.
They will come very close. They will become very close. I do a chart also that is the sum of the individuals and what's the delta from the district to the sum of. And it's no more generally than like 2 students per grade level across the board, which I consider to be insignificant.
Are those charts in here? In your
The delta
final-
chart on those 2 summaries, no.
In your report? I'd be curious to see those, just if you have them. I mean, don't generate them if you don't have them, but if you have them, I'd be curious.
So when you do that, when you send it back to us, that'll be part of the final report, Mr. Sundeb.
I agree, I think that would be helpful to have.
Yeah. And then,
I'm not so sure about that, but, I mean, I have no problem sending it to you.
Humorous,
Whether it'll be made a part of the final report, we can discuss it.
okay, so long as we have it, I don't care where it shows up. And then my last question is, you in answer to someone's question, I forget whose, you said that we're roughly, in the elementary, roughly 600, we average 640 students a class. In middle school, it's 690, and in high school, it's 670, roughly, rounded.
Right, based on last,
Right.
the last count in October.
So from middle school to high school, it looks like it's 20 students per grade difference. But you're projecting that the high schools are going to be 120 per grade?
Right, because
Increase?
that pig moves through the python over
Right,
those
but if
5 years.
but if our,
Can we find another metaphor, please, to describe our students?
but if our poor, pick a word. Whatever that word is, that 690 is that bigger number, that bulge. I don't know.
Yeah,
But you're talking about 100 students more coming in addition to that bulge moving at every grade level.
right. So it is a function of the already existing larger classes, then times a survival ratio.
This is not.
So it's
if
like
I can-
compounded growth.
This is not, as I recollect, not different than last year, where we said that there was a secondary
not.
in-migration. So where in many districts, you see the in-migration, if it's a half-day K at that first grade, and then in fact, you see a certain number of students who will leave at the 8th grade and go on to independent schools and so forth and so on. That's a fairly typical, so you see a drop-off. Here you're seeing an increase at the secondary level of in-migration, so it's over and above the cohort survival. Did I say that correctly?
Well, the cohort survival rates are higher as a result of that in-migration at that one crossover point in
I think I
particular,
said it
yeah.
right.
No, you actually, right into the last sentence. The last sentence, I think, was wrong, because the cohort survival is what accounts for that, not in addition to. the cohorts.
But, yeah, so the
But-
survival rate between the 8th grade and 9th is like about 107, I'll say it as a percent, 107%. And the previous growth in those middle school grade levels is more on the order of 101 or 102%. You get 5% more in that transition year between 8th grade and 9th grade.
Right, but if you're talking about the bulge coming through at an average of 20 students per year, plus the cohort, plus, Bob, maybe you did say it right and I said it wrong, but.
I did. I was good.
I'm giving you credit for it.
There are more students, if you were to look at the cohort survival from birth, more students move into the district. So instead of it being like 80% or 90%, even 100%, it's over 100%.
That's not my question.
Right.
That's not my question. I agree that that's the case, that you know, it's 1% in middle school and it's 7% in the high schools, additional students. But it's not 100 students, that's like more than 7%. I mean, I'm just really confused by the average middle school class being 190, and the average high school class, right now, and the average high school class is 170. So that bulge is 20, on average, 20 students per grade. And but then you said that it's 120 per grade, that you're expecting over the next 5 years, 120 per grade.
Well, yeah, and that's just all those cohort survival ratios and all that in-migration that we have been having for 6 years. That just is the trend, and it continues. All that I said earlier was that overall for 6 years, we were looking at like 200 student increases per year, and that is going to be a lesser number from in-migration because of the impact that we've documented of about 70 students per year from new housing. So it must only be about 130 from in-migration. It is going to be a smaller
That's all
in-migration
right.
number.
I'm going to let it go.
Just a couple of quick questions. I think kind of follows up. I'm just looking at the Kinwood slide as an example.
Okay.
It might be helpful just to, if we could turn that to that one, so everybody knows what I'm asking a question about. Oh, there we go. Okay. Now, when you say there's 75 students from new housing, is that per year or over?
During the 5-year
During the
projection
5-year period. All right. And so, and also, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you weren't able to give us a projection for by grade, how that is happening?
Yes, on this table.
Okay.
That shows history, the 5-year progression, and the extended 6 to 10 year.
Yeah, I'm not
By
talking,
grade
I mean the
level.
new students.
Oh, new students.
I'm talking about the students from new housing. You couldn't pinpoint whether it's first grade, second grade, third grade. I'm just wondering what precision that number, that's what I'm asking you.
I find that precision to be unnecessary. Yes, I take, if there's 75 coming into that attendance area, I divide it by the 13 grade levels, and they get equally whatever.
Okay, and also,
I'm
sorry.
Let me tell you, I used to do what you're telling me, and I would put, a little higher percentage. It wasn't making significant differences in the projection.
I'm not telling, I'm just asking.
Yeah.
And then, just to follow up, in terms of the students from new housing, you just assign them to the catchment from where the buildings were?
Yes.
Regardless of where we might want to assign them?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, but just to, if over time, the new housing became not so new, and you noticed that very few of them were secondary students, as opposed to elementary, then it might be reasonable to look at that, wouldn't it? Instead of spreading them over the 13 grades?
Yes. Yeah, if you had backup information for 3 or 4 years that was happening, it might.
Let me just say, the reason I'm saying that is because I've been in districts where there was a significant amount of let's say, university students who tended to bring young families. So you might be able to make a prediction in that. That's the only reason.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would think it's probably not evenly distributed over all the grades, and there probably would be more towards the elementary or younger kids, but that's not something the Rutgers study would give us, or you'd be
No,
able
it
to.
does. It does. It is my professional judgment. I've done it both ways, and it's not worth all the detailed analysis.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to just clarify, make sure I'm understanding correctly, but you presented very clearly. I just want to make sure. So if we're just looking at this slide, the kindergarten students in 2017 you have as 50. And so in 2018, those kindergartens, there would be 81 students.
Correct.
So there'd be that increase there of
Yeah,
what?
the increase across the district, it's about 145% increase from
Right.
kindergarten to first grade.
Okay, and then for the high school, the largest increases are there. You said it's not coming from the new housing because there's only 21 from new housing for Harriton and 62 for Lower Merion, but the increase is much larger. So those are people that would maybe be coming and maybe moving in, going from 8th
Right.
grade in a private or parochial school or moving.
For all the various
Right.
reasons
Okay.
that people do come in at the high school level.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sandell. And now we have a report from Montgomery County Planning Commission, Mr. Dan Farina.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Dan Farina. I'm a county planner at the Montgomery County Planning Commission, and I was tasked with, along with our department, to project the enrollment for the Lower Merion School District over the next 10 years. We've done these studies in the past, 2 of them. The first one was conducted in the spring of 2015, using data up through 2014-15. The recommended scenario in that study was option 2, and it projected a gain at the time of 1,248 students through 2024-25. The next study that we did was an update, was performed in the fall of 2016, and it was based on data up through the 2016-17 school year. The recommended scenario in that, option A, projected a gain of 1,042 students over 10 years, and that was a horizon through 2025-26. This current school year study goes through the horizon of 2027-28 school year. We anticipated growth based on a number of factors, and I will go over them in depth in the next couple of slides, but just a little sampling is we believe there's a continuation of larger recent classes, the popularity and representation of the district, more families choosing public school over private school compared to the past, which is a countywide trend in general, but a little bit more pronounced in Lower Merion School District. An increase in expected residential construction, especially multifamily projects, also something that we're seeing on a countywide level. More public students coming from older apartment units in the district, another countywide trend shared by a number of districts. And lastly, an increase in housing sales activity with a larger net result of incoming students, and I'll explain how we measure that. Just doing a little historical background on the district, which I won't go into too much depth as George has done so, but you can see that these 4 lines represent the different grade distributions as well as the district as a whole, enrollment from 2008 onwards. You can see that total K through 12 has had a generally upward trajectory with a few years of a little bit plateauing, but generally on the upward trend. Where it gets most interesting is where you look at the individual grade distributions, K through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12. With K through 5 5, you can clearly see that there was a steady, significant growth from 2008-9 school year up until about 2015-16, where in the last couple of years, we've generally started to plateau in terms of enrollment growth in there. Now, barring significant increases at the K-5 level, extreme growth going forward over the next 10 years is not necessarily likely in that situation, as that bulge, essentially, like we were talking about, will have to move through the rest of the district. And unless you're replacing them with larger classes on the back end, it's not going to result in significant growth at the lower end. 6 through 8, you can see, is starting to show upward trend as K through 5 is kind of plateauing, and that's expected as all of that growth you see from 2008-9 school year through 2015-16 in K through 5 is now making its way partially through the middle school years. And then a couple years in the line, you'll likely see the 9 through 12 line also go up. But overall, the district reflects a high period of growth over the past 10 years. And in the past, like I said, elementary schools were the prime driver, but going forward, you're going to see middle school growth accelerating. Now, private school is an interesting fact for this district in terms of there are so many private schools located within the district itself, providing I guess, an enticing alternative to the general public school district. But that enticement has obviously been waning to a degree as the percentage of kids aged 5 through 17 that live within the district, the percentage of them attending private school has decreased from 2000 to 2015, as well as the overall absolute number. You can see that in 2000, according to the U.S. Census, there were 4,174 private school students within the district, and about 39% of those aged 5 through 17 overall. That's what that accounts for. And then by 2015, you're seeing it come all the way down to just over 3,000 students, and a 28% of those aged 5 through 17 within the district. To kind of prop that one data point up, we also looked at Lower Merion School District's busing data. So this displays how many students choose district bus service in order to take their kids to private school. You can see that generally it supports a downward trajectory trend, and it's gone from about 3,200 to 2,500 between 2008 and 2017. We do housing impact and rates for housing impact a little bit differently. We use the 2010 census as a basis for our analysis, and we come up with both countywide as well as local district rates, at which, so we believe they're a little bit more representative of the actual districts showing in these different housing types. So typically, multifamily provides the fewest school-age children, and even in buildings, which I will show you, that have recently been completed, which have higher rates than average, it's still not going above a 0.2 rate, which is 1 in 5 students per unit, basically. But what we do from there is we break it down between existing and new units to see how many students likely come from those existing units in all different housing categories, as well as those coming from newly built units. And for the purpose of this study, new means built between 2000 and 2010. So with that being said, at the countywide level, existing units, school-age children per household in existing units, single-family detached is 0.55, so roughly 1 in 2. One student in every 2 units. Single-family attached is 0.41, roughly 1 in 2.5, 3, and then multifamily is 0.18, roughly 1 in 5. When looking at just new units at the countywide level, single-family detached has a much higher showing at 0.93, basically 1-to-1 ratio. Single-family attached is less, is 0.21, basically 1 in 5, and multifamily is 0.06, basically 1 in every 20 units. Now, at the Lower Merion School District level, there wasn't enough data, unfortunately, and this is typically the case in most of our districts. There wasn't enough data on new housing to come up with specific ones for single-family detached, attached, and multifamily as their own. We do have them for existing. You can see that single-family detached tracks higher than the countywide average at 0.64. Single-family attached tracks less at 0.31, and multifamily even less so at 0.06. So those coming from existing units in the Lower Merion School District, especially for attached and multifamily, are less than the countywide average. Now, with the reasons we don't have the ones for the new units is because the way that it's calculated, or new units are calculated in the census, is at the tract level. And the only way that they do that is when the tract is a homogeneous housing type. In other words, the tract can only have one housing type in it, either single-family detached, attached, or multifamily. And in Lower Merion, that's a kind of an issue for a lot of the tracts because there are a lot of different housing types within a given tract, especially in the east. So those numbers just aren't available at a great enough scale for us to derive anything that would be indicative of the district as a whole and not just a specific development that was included. Further, going into multifamily, this is how we kind of temper that, as most of the new development prescribed over the next 5 years is multifamily with a few single-family attached mixed in there. But we look at the ratios for units, for buildings with 20 or more units in them, and you can see clearly that they've gone up since the 2006-07 school year. At that time, it was 249 students coming from 5,400 units. And that was 0.046, a rate of 0.046. All the way up to 2017, where now you have 614 students coming from 5,900 units, so there's more units in there than was in 2006, but still. And that's a ratio of 0.10. So roughly in larger apartment buildings existing, you're getting 1 in every 10 unit has a child, roughly. We also looked at smaller buildings, just for giggles, to see if whether or not there was a greater correlation with the smaller, older buildings as opposed to the larger ones. And actually, there's a lesser correlation. There was a slower rate of growth in that sense, but it went from 45 to 71 students coming from 531 units, 0.08 ratio to 0.13. And then what we did to as a response to the district's concern about multifamily development and just how much is actually coming from multifamily development as opposed, and how it may be outside the general trend for the rest of the county. We actually looked at how many students have come from the most recent multifamily developments. So we have the Royal Athena and the Square are the top two that came in last year. Now they both post rates that are above the average for new units, and they also have significant amounts of 3 and 2 bedroom apartments, which you don't typically see as a dominant form in most multifamily outside of at least suburban districts. So that definitely contributes to it. There are certain amenities the Royal Athena has, certain seclusion that it has, and also connection to Philadelphia that might make it a little bit more amenable for families. And as such, you see that there's 42 students coming from 275 completed units. There are still 318 to go. The Square was 0.13 with 6 students coming from 46 units. But you can also see Declan House, built in 2015, only 2 years ago, has 33 units, no students. Cambridge Square, Corinthian, similar dynamic, decent amount of units, recently built, not that many students coming from them. Palmer Seminary is admittedly an outlier. That's it's a beautiful development and a rehab, so it could have a little bit more of a cachet in that sense and be a little bit more attractive to families. So from that, you see 110 units, 22 students coming from there for a rate of 0.2. That's the highest from all the most recent new development. The flip side of the housing coin and the impact is the sales activity. And we measure that by taking the schools or the district's address rosters for students and cross-referencing that with our own county sales records, which we compile every year and produce a report. We're able to figure out how many students came in a given school year through housing sales and how many left through a given school year. And with that analysis being complete, you can see that just in general, number of units sold from 2009 through 2016. A few years are missing, but in general, you can see that it's been trending, more upwards, since that point. So in 2009, there was a significant amount less units being sold, but at the time, that resulted in a net change of plus 40. In this past year, the net change as a result of sales was positive 132 more students, essentially, as a result of sales. But what's probably more interesting with this graph is that the number of incoming students in general every year is roughly around 315. You're getting a pretty steady rate of new students through sales, regardless of how many students are leaving in a given year, and that can be for a whole host of reasons, corporate relocations, other aspects that we can't really predict the outcome. But it also, you can see that the sales level is starting to come back to pre-recession levels. It may never get quite as high as in the 2005 to 6 boom years as we've seen, because if you go further back, it does go a little bit higher. But at the same time, there's also a lot less inventory on the market currently, about 18% in Montgomery County less year over year, October. So these are things to keep in mind. When looking at new housing, the one key difference with us is that we do take out the trend level of development, which is typical of these models, and we've done it in the previous ones before. You can see that there is a good amount of single-family detached and attached regular trend level development and some multifamily mixed in as well. But the last couple of years, there's been around 472 units built and added to the inventory of the township. An additional 1,566 new units are what is expected over the next 5 years. This is just a geographic distribution, or a map, essentially, of where all of the newly built housing is located. You can see there's a pretty, even spread of single-family detached across the school district. Whereas attached and multifamily tend to be clustered around Lancaster Road and Bryn Mawr, Ardmore, more urban parts of the district. You can see also, too, in the upper right-hand corner of that, there's a big brown dot in Kinwood. That represents the Royal Athena, and if you look in the graph, you can see that there's 276 new units in 2016 for Kinwood. That's mainly attributed to the Royal Athena. And we also take this housing construction and put it in the context of each individual elementary school as well, and tailor it to that. This is just a map of all upcoming development and where it's going to be located. You can see a significant amount of it, or pretty much all of it, is in the eastern side of the township or along Lancaster Avenue. Most of the smaller buildings or smaller units or developments are clustered in and around Lancaster Avenue. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner in Kinwood that there's some large developments, and that's as a result of some mixed-use inclusivity in the Bala Office Park to come. And then the Royal Athena also has an additional 318 units that are still to be delivered. That all translates into this housing matrix, in which we then apply all of our rates, or rates of students per unit, to what we expect to be the development in each of these successive years. We developed this, as George said, from conversations with the township planners, and figuring out where these are in their development cycle and when these are likely to be affecting each individual school year. So we have a variety of factors. Most of them are multifamily. We have two different factors for single-family attached, and the main reason for the two different is for some of the smaller developments that are closer to the core or the Lancaster Avenue corridor are a little less, more highly trafficked areas, a little less maybe family friendly, whereas some of the other ones are a little further back, a little bit more setback in the neighborhoods, and we give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they might have a little bit of a higher rate. Now with multifamily, we take 0.15 is our most rigorous rate, and we apply that to the ongoing Royal Athena development, as well as other developments similar to Royal Athena, either placed similarly, have similar amount of seclusion, certain level of amenities, trail access, things like that. If they're like that, we're giving them the benefit of the doubt and applying a higher than what we would expect rate. Then we have a little bit more of a tempered variant of that, 0.10, which we apply to the two that are coming in, the two big developments that are coming in at Kinwood. We think that they might be a little bit more amenable to working professionals with small children. And then beyond that, with some of the smaller multifamily developments that are interspersed throughout the township, we just gave them the typical 0.06 as that is what they are generally exhibiting based on the history of it. And then at the bottom, you can see we have the total amount of public school children as a result of that, and then we subtract out the trend level impact, and then we're left with net increases for all of these years. You can see that a lot of it is to be delivered in the next couple of years, hence the kind of front loading of that. But overall, we expect around 107 new students as a result of these specific developments over the next 5 years. I'm not going to go into depth into the model of how a cohort progression works. We've already gone through that, but this is what our cohort progression model looks like with the traditional birth to kindergarten. We did something a little different with this iteration of the study. We employed what we believe is a slightly more representative correlation between birth and first grade as opposed to birth to kindergarten and then kindergarten to first. I'll explain what that looks like and why we did that on the next slide. You can see here, if you follow the color ribbons, that's the numbers that all correlate to each other or reference each other and the given trajectory of a class. So with that 2012-13 school year, you can see that there are 566 births 6 years earlier than the kindergarten class of 438. That 438 is a wide difference from 566, and it kind of carries throughout the successive years as well. Pretty low kindergartens compared to what are generally much higher births 6 years earlier. Now, when you follow that grade in 2012-13, that kindergarten to first, it bumps all the way up to 630. It's a very large gap to really say that there's any indication that those affect each other, or that one affects the other. So we believe that that birth 6 years earlier, as a result of the unique situation in which parents find themselves in Lower Merion, specifically with the half-day kindergarten, and how they might be a little bit more amenable to sending their kids to private school at that time or for other reasons, that a number of students actually come in to the Lower Merion School District at first grade. So we're making that assumption, and as such, we've amended our model to reflect that. And you can see too that the range of rates or progression rates when using the B to K to or K to 1 model are wider than the B to 1. So we look at that as somewhat of an indication that that's a tighter correlation between birth and first grade as opposed to birth and kindergarten. Now, that method, using that method, the B to 1, results in a projection that's 111 students fewer than if we use the traditional model. The traditional model would have given us over 1,000, similar to our last study last year. This one tempers that growth a bit and provides about 918 more students over the next 10 years. So it's still a significant amount of growth. It's just tempered with the idea that the correlation between birth and first is a more strong one than birth to kindergarten. Now, we do break it down on individual levels, and as George did, make an inference to that, when you get the smaller the cohorts get, or the number of the students get, or the school that you're looking at, the less rigorous or accurate, essentially, the model's likely to be. But regardless of that, we still do projections on an individual school basis. Our overall district-wide is its own animal. We don't add up the different schools to get the overall district-wide. But what you can see is that not all of the individual elementary schools necessarily fit the logic. Don't necessarily fit the logic of the B to 1 progression, right? So if you're looking at just the spread of ranges, you can see that there are Marion and Penguin Elementary School actually have narrow ranges when you're looking at B to K to 1. So for that, we applied the original model, the B to K traditional model. For the other schools, they still exhibited that wide set of ranges at B to K and K to 1. So we decided to do B to 1 for those. And what's interesting about that, despite using the different models for the school building, they still tracked pretty closely to what the overall district-wide model for those grades were. This is just another example to further illustrate the B to 1. So you can see, if you look at 2014-15 and 15-16 school years, you can see that there were 54 and 55 kindergartners, respectively, in those years. However, the births were widely different, 83 and 64, respectively. Now, they track a lot closer, that 83 tracks a lot closer to that 92 and that 64 to that 78 than it does those two kindergartens, which are almost identical in population. So this is just a good illustration of what we believe the quirks, essentially, in the district, that we're trying to kind of iron out and give you a little bit more of a succinct, accurate, what we believe is accurate projection. So if you're looking at 2017-18, this current school year, you had 58 births 6 years prior, which was actually fairly low compared to the average. And that resulted in a kindergarten class that still tracks pretty well with those 54 and 55, 51. Now, as a result of our model, we project that next year you'd have a first grade of 68 students. If you're using the traditional B to K method, you would have 78. So there's an 11 student difference overall when there's an extra student as well, I believe in third grade in the traditional B to K model. So if you look at that, then it's an 11 student difference. If you add up the differences that would come from all the different schools, it does add up. But overall, it's 111 students less than what would be the traditional model. So when we're looking at just the B to 1 method results for district-wide, you can see, like I said, there's 918 more students over that period. There is a significant amount of growth in that first 5-year period, most of it, and that's mainly due to the fact that the housing adjustment accounts for the next 5 years, not speculative development that we don't know will or may not come beyond that 5-year period. And you can see that, yes, that's 918, goes from 8590 to 9508. When you're looking at just the individual, the grade level distributions, elementary school is projected to grow about 65 more students over that 10-year period. pretty variable year to year since it's reflecting of that plateau that you've seen the last couple years of enrollment. But the biggest impacts will be seen in the middle school and high school years, middle school being around 274 after 10 years, high school being 579. When looking at the individual elementary schools, you can see that 3 of them have a small net decrease after 10 years, and 3 of them have net positive increases. Kinwood and Penn-Wynne both see between 15 and 16 respectively new students, and Marion does see, similar to George's, the most growth at 50 students overall by the end of 10 years. Now, roughly, the 3 schools that see a decrease track with the middle school that is showing the least amount of growth. So Welch Valley, we believe, will see about 90 new students over that period, peaking in the first 5 years, and Bala-Kinwood will see 185 new students, and that tracks fairly well with which schools feed into which ones and which ones projected growth and which ones didn't. And the same carries on to the high school. We project about 386 more students for the Lower Marion High School and about 193 more students for Harridan High School. This also, and especially Harridan's number, is affected greatly by the evolving high school choice zone and the percentage distribution of how many students choose each different school. So it started with favoring more Harridan, now it's moving back towards favoring more Lower Marion. So as that happens and as we add more years of those progressions, we get a more accurate depiction of where their trajectory is going in terms of enrollment strength. So in conclusion, we believe that growth will continue overall. There are still many large grades in the district, and they will be causing growth in the upper schools going forward. In addition to the attractiveness of the district, private school enrollment continues to decline, multifamily continues to provide more students, and new residential construction is continuing. However, it does become more difficult to grow after sustained periods such as the last 8 years, especially at the elementary school level where large grades have become more consistent from K through 5th. Under the recommended scenario, the district grows by another 918 students over the next 10 years. Growth hits the high schools the hardest, 579 students added, with middle school adding 274 next, and elementary schools staying relatively stable. Some schools may still have capacity issues, such as Marion, that will still see growth in the interim period. Any questions, clarification?
Thank you very much for the presentation. Do you have questions? I can start at this end if you want. Diane, do you have anything right now?
I do.
Do you?
I do.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question. I think when I go look at one of the former reports from MCPC, you gave, I'm going to try to find the slide there. It was on slide 5 where you talk about number of children coming from Lower Marion School District existing single-family detached, single-family attached, and multifamily. Sorry, my eyesight's that one. My question is, that's 2010 information.
Yes.
So it is, then I compare that with what we're seeing in some of, as you comment, Royal Athena, Palmer. So that's what we have now in 2016, 2017. Yeah. Why do you feel these numbers are, should we be adjusting those numbers shown on this slide to be more, quote, relevant today, 2016, 17, versus what we saw in 2010?
I see what you're saying. So when concerning the new development going forward, right, too, and trying to apply what what we're currently seeing and how that might extrapolate outwards, we don't, like I said, we don't have the rates for new units up there specifically for detached and attached, as they're not really a significant amount of your ongoing development. We did take a look, like I said, at the existing development, and we incorporated those rates or rates closer to those rates in order to more accurately, what we believe more accurately, pick how the trend is playing out in your district. There are a number of developments across the county that are newer that have also shown higher than average rates, but when taken as a whole, as a group, the average is 0.06. But yeah, no, I see what you're saying. We don't apply this, the rate down there is for existing units. That's just to illustrate what's coming in general from your district as it stands. We applied the rates at the factors at the bottom left on this slide to the developments there. So and they're all accounted for, the 2 single-family attached developments as well as the multitude of multifamily and the different rates as attached to them.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on Ben's question. So what we have seen, however, correct me if I'm wrong, is now that the new ones are coming on, they may not have a high rate of students coming from those, but now the older ones are increasing.
Well, yes, they are, but to a declining rate, though. So at some point, there's only so many people who are willing to do that, and there's not many developments that we're seeing, or like 0.9. In other words, where there's nearly students for every unit. There are some, and there are districts where that actually is the case. Not typically with larger apartment buildings, but there is an increasing rate, and there will continue to be so, and we do say that, and that's definitely something to keep in the back of your mind.
So with our older multifamily units, are you applying a higher
Well,
rate
we don't project old multifamily units. We're only projecting new development. So we're trying to project for you what likely new multifamily development will do to your district in terms of enrollment.
But they're already in.
But they're already in the model.
Right?
See, essentially they're
in the
baked
model.
into the enrollment already through the previous enrollment histories. So any increase you're seeing in any increase you're seeing in students in older units are represented in your enrollment numbers in the history, and therefore that trend is essentially baked into the model.
So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to jump to actually, it's this slide where you kind of did answer my question. You kind of look at a unit and say, all right, we're going to bump the factor up or down depending on what's coming. But then that yellow line at the bottom right corner, you subtract out almost 80 kids. And I don't quite understand why you're taking kids out. It seems to me.
So this is where we diverge from Georgia's model, where Georgia decided not to remove that, and which is typical. You typically remove trend level amount from this because it's, again, like I was saying, in essence baked into the model. So for continuity's sake with the other models, we already switched up the method to a degree, so we decided to keep subtracting that out. But yeah, that represents what would be your trend level of development across all different categories that you already see that you don't necessarily want to double count.
I guess I'm trying to understand. I guess that's what I don't understand why you say. I mean, we're definitely. I'm going to pick on the Royal Athena, which is at the top.
Sure.
As you point out, we already have 250 units. They're there. People are living there. Kids are coming from there. But we're expected to get 318 more.
Yeah.
So units. Thank you. So 318 more units. I guess if you were to multiply right now, those 318 units, because they don't exist, produce 0 students today. So when they come online, starting 2020, 21, and 2022, we should start seeing students from them.
Yeah.
But why isn't those students coming from the new 318 somewhat, I don't want to use the word independent, of the students who live in the 250? Because you can't live in both places. So I don't understand why you're subtracting this out. I guess I still don't. I'm trying to understand it because they're not here. Those 318 units they're not here today.
Well, no, of course they're not here today, yeah.
So to multiply like a cohort survival, which you don't do to an apartment building of 0 that doesn't exist, is 0, right? I mean, I'm trying to think that the Royal Athena 318 should track roughly with the Royal Athena 250 that have already
exactly,
been built.
and it does. The factor applied to all those 318 units that we're projecting going forward is 0.15. What you're getting hung up on is the typical removal of development that exists as a part of the model because it's already in there. If a kid came in a new unit in 2015, he's in your model. He's already represented there. But we don't want to conflate that with so essentially what we're trying to do is project development above what you normally see. How many more students are going to come into the district as a result of development above and beyond what you already see?
Can I just clarify, because I think this is the issue. So, because I had this question to myself, I didn't ask it before because I thought I got it and then I wasn't, now I'm not so sure. So if you were to say to somebody, because we're getting this a lot, like how many kids are coming from, single-family homes and how many kids are coming from multifamily units? That's not, what you have up there is not answering that question. You're saying how many kids are likely to be coming from new units, but because the existing units are already baked into the system, you're not getting that total number, right? In other words, that's a different question.
It is. Well, no, that is. So you want to know how many students are coming from already existing.
Yeah, because people are saying this, well, how much are coming from the multifamily
Aside
units
from
and
having each individual address You know what I mean? And being
Right.
able to,
So
it's going to
that's
be,
not,
yeah.
so the reason why, because whether they're coming from single family or multifamily, if it already exists, it's baked into the system.
Yes.
And if it's new, it doesn't matter what type of unit it is, that's what you're predicting, but we just happen to be
Yeah.
expecting a lot more multifamily
Yes,
units, I
exactly.
think. Okay.
I will continue, I'm sorry, I will continue to think about this, but I'm still not.
Okay.
But my last question is, you're on slide 14 where you change over, MCPC used B to K last 2 or 3 rounds.
Yes, we did.
Now some cases you're converting from B to K to B to first.
Well, no, we're going from B to K, K to 1, we're going B to, yes, exactly.
So
We're
you've
going
changed
from-
your model
Exactly.
at the very, very early stage of
Yes.
this for that. So I have 2 questions. You didn't do it for every single elementary school.
No, we didn't. We applied it on a logic of the width, like essentially the width of the ranges, right? So we take averages of our progression rates to figure that out. But there's a range in which they go. So you can have, 1.2 one year, and then you could have 1.4 another. That range, the wider it gets, we believe the less efficable the model was, or less correlating those 2 years actually were to each other. So using that logic, in schools that we saw wider gaps, if you use the B to 1 method, we didn't apply it. But at the same time, and what George also touched on, is that these individual elementary school levels, it's already difficult to accurately predict. So the district-wide model incorporates one type, the B to 1. So that's what I'd call more attention to. But we do, like I said, we did kind of, I don't say cherry pick, but we did tailor it we looked at them as if they were in vacuums, as if it was the only thing we were projecting. So as a result, we applied our logic to each individual elementary school, and whichever one satisfied, we used that model. Now, as a result, like I said, they still tracked very close to the district-wide number that we just used B to 1 for everything.
So my only other question that I'm concerned about is, had you done B to K this year, I'm just following the first bullet point.
Sure.
You're projecting 111 students less than using a...
More, yeah. Right, so the B to 1 provides, okay. So if we were using B to K, the traditional model, it would be over 1,000 students. Because we're using B to 1, it's 918.
Okay, that's where I was going. Now, my question, this is gonna be a loaded question, but last year's MCPC was, while it was you guys were in line mostly, where both you and Sundance failed, or not failed, that's the wrong word, I apologize.
That's okay.
That was the wrong word, I didn't mean that, I apologize.
No, I know you
I pull it back. But in your both elementary enrollments, you under-projected.
Yes.
So I'm a little concerned that if B to K gives you, quote, more kids,
Right,
and you under-projected last year, going to B to 1 seems problematic to me.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay, thank you. And I didn't mean fail.
No,
I
you're
didn't mean
fine.
that.
You're fine. It's okay. In an effort to understand how this would have actually played out if we had used B to 1 with last year's enrollment study, we actually ran it, and we figured out what the enrollment would be, or where it was this year, and how that tracked with your actual. And quite frankly, it was spot on. There were only 2 students less at the district-wide level when we used B to 1. There were 20 students left, so still projecting a shortfall in your K to 5. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to follow up on the point around, believe it's slide 11, with the varied factors of the new developments.
Sure, yeah.
So I want to get a sense of how we're taking into consideration as you decide, because you're making a judgment, obviously,
yes.
around what factor for what what development. So my question is around how do you take into consideration the fact that Lower Merion's a high quality school district, highly sought after, where families might make the choice to rent versus own?
Yes.
How does that get factored in terms of the choice, given that we're seeing a larger number of students than we expected, for example, in the Royal Athena?
Yes.
Where we were told originally, oh, no kids will live, there'll be no families there. So we want to obviously get a sense of what's realistic in terms of our own planning, in terms of students coming in, not just in the newer developments, but across the board.
Fair enough. So that's why we apply the different levels of factors.
Okay.
In times past, we typically use just one factor, or I think in the last study there was a factor of 0.12 and a 0.04. Well, we upped of those. The lowest now is 0.06, the highest is 0.15, and 0.15 is exactly what you're seeing in the Royal Athena. So using the logic that you're likely to see continued level of, or the similar level of students coming from that type of development, we applied that factor, that highest factor, to a number of developments that were similar to the Royal Athena. So we weren't stingy with applying the heavier one. So if anything, we're giving the district the benefit of the doubt. In general, Lower Merion the benefit of the doubt that you are a strong draw, that more people will be willing to make the choice to live in an apartment as opposed to own a home. Specifically, too, as single-family detached homes and attached homes are a little harder to come by, too, especially in certain various different price ranges. So at the same time, we understand that in Lower Merion, it might be a little bit more of a necessity if someone wants to be in your district and they can't find the home that they want, to make the choice to either rent or buy a condo. This is not necessarily unlike what we've seen in other districts. For instance, Cheltenham has a similar dynamic, where we're seeing more and more students in those type of developments or multifamily in general, because there's not as much housing on the market to absorb the people who want to be there. And you're kind of also in a generational transfer right now as well. You're seeing a huge deluge of people probably coming around, quite frankly, my age, late 20s, early 30s, with their first kid or about to have a kid, who are now making that jump to districts like Lower Merion. So that's definitely a factor. And we believe that these higher factors that we apply to this development does account for that cachet the district has.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm just trying to, on the same slide, can you just explain what is the bottom table? I found a number 15.9, which I got by multiplying 106 for the Royal Athena times the 0.15, but where are these other numbers? What do they represent? Which apartment building are we looking at?
Well, they're an aggregate, so it's not going to be one-to-one like I do have a broken out sheet that I can share with you that shows the individual ones per each building if you'd like. But it all adds up to the same thing. That's just more of a composite. We're adding together certain lines or certain developments.
Is that something the board wants in the final report?
I think that would be very useful.
Okay, that's more than doable. Yes. Sure.
So just to follow up, so where it says 1.86 under 2018,
Yes.
is that how many children from the 0.06 per unit section? And
Yes.
then there's 0 from the 0.10 section, and then
Exactly.
So all the ones that you applied.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Corresponds to that.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, no problem.
I'm not even sure how to formulate this, so I'm going to try this. So I'm looking for the long-term trend chart. I'm trying to find that.
The one in the beginning, you mean? Or
Yeah. No, the one that projects out.
oh.
Must be towards the end. And I think I'm asking this of both, there you are, both of you, which is, okay, so both of you are projecting that elementary school levels off, and we see, the continued increase in middle school and then high school, even though the rates increase as you go higher in the grades.
Yeah.
If the elementary school levels off, then the increases, as those people, one would expect, even though they'll probably continue to increase, will sort of level off as
Yeah.
well. So I'm trying to understand, the cohort survival rate is based on trends. So, what starts it to, the trend to reverse? What are the factors that could do? It would be that birth rates
Decline.
Decline
Yes.
would be an obvious one, right?
Sales could collapse of your homes, so you wouldn't have that.
Right, okay, so there are certain things that
Yeah.
you can predict and other things that you can't predict so
Certainly.
much, right? So obviously, if there's an economic downturn, that could shift things. Private school, the independent school is, I think, very interesting. So there's been a decline in the percentage of our students in this area that go to private schools. It's closer to now the norm in Montgomery County, right? But it's still higher, is that
It is
correct?
still higher, yes, but it is closer to what you'd see in other districts. That's typical. I think in most other districts, I see between 18 and 22%.
So, I mean, obviously, on the one, we can only go with the information that we have right now in order to, to make decisions. But I'm trying to understand, do we see you talked about turnover and the
Yes.
number of families who, where you have younger people coming in. You actually had, I think, that really slowed down after the economic
Yes.
crisis, and so I think there was probably pent-up demand, right? But, one presumes that that a lot of those people, once they move here, aren't going anywhere.
Yes.
Right? They're not, that turnover is not going, it would have to slow down a bit. Most people would stay here for a period of time until their kids are done, and then they
The
kind of
generational
move
transfer
on.
of housing, yes. We're in
So-
the midst of the boomers essentially to the millennials in that
Right,
sense.
so private schools, we don't know if it's going to continue to decrease, but we haven't hit yet the Montgomery County average.
No, you haven't hit essentially a bottom, but this could be essentially maybe Lower Merion's bottom. Again, as we want to try and relate it to a large geography that is the county, or try and relate it in general
Right,
to other
okay,
townships.
so-
Sometimes you are an
is-
outlier in and of yourself.
And so,
Yeah.
and then the generational shift, given what we've seen, is that going to continue for some period of time, or do you think we've sort of
Well, I
seeing
mean,
the tail
that's,
end of-
it all, okay, so the age band right now. So the
Right.
youngest in that cohort are around 23, 24 now.
they're
They
so
still got a
young.
ways to go. They still got time to couple, they still got time to have children. But your oldest cohort is now 35, your oldest part, 35, 36. So half of it, you're kind of nearing the end of that. You still probably got another half, this is all conjecture. You still got some time to go in terms of generational transfer. And you're right, and you were right to say, too, the pent-up demand. Because there was a significant amount of time where a lot of people could not afford to leave their homes, even if they desired to, or transfer their homes, or downsize.
So the only thing I'm really hearing you saying is that birth rates seem to have, the reason why it sort of seems to have stabilized at the elementary school only seems to be birth rate. Is that what I'm hearing? There's nothing else. What else is causing that to stabilize right now? Your projections, both of you, right? I'd have to go back and look, but your projections suggest that the elementary school is probably stabilized, right?
Yes.
Why?
Why? I see what you're saying. Aside from just being a function of the model, it's hard to really it's hard to really make any.
That is what's worrying me,
Yeah.
right? Like, what is the reasoning behind it slowing down at that point right now? What can you tell us that you think, why do you think it's slowing down? And do you think that, what's the empirical basis for that?
Well, exactly. That's the thing. So when we were talking about how the generational transfer, I can't speak to exactly how many of your homes were transferred from people who were essentially empty nesters to those who weren't. Without that, I really can't make any concerted or certain suggestion as to where you are in that cycle. It could be that you are at the end of that cycle for Lower Merion. Lower Merion, again, is a choice district when people decide to jump.
Well,
To jump towards it. If George wants to take a crack at it, too, that's fine.
is there any reason that you all, besides that the birth rates, right, went down slightly? Is that accurate, or did I miss that up?
I don't know what you
Well, ultimately, it's always a factor just either of the survival rate or of the in-out migration. And you just are saying, what we're finding, but we don't know the reason why, is that at that level, the people who are coming into the district must have fewer elementary age children. But no, there's no way for us to discern the reason why.
No, but that could also be to a function too of the average housing price in Lower Merion is one of the highest in the county. It's a little bit maybe more or less of a starting family home, and maybe more of a second, aging family home.
Right.
So that could play into
I
the
would
more
absolutely
later
agree.
age students being the bigger
Right.
factor actually than ongoing elementary school students from housing churn. But again, without any specific data where we can really make that tie, it's hard to say.
By any chance, do you happen to know what the average length of home ownership is?
I do not. No, not offhand, no. In Lower Marion specifically, or
Yeah.
just, no, I do not know offhand, sorry.
Okay, I mean, so my thought being, once somebody buys a house, do they stay in it for 20 years? In
It's
which case,
typical.
through
Of
course
the housing stock that you have in Lower Marion, it's typical for that to be the case. Now, granted, Lower Marion, again, is, like I said, a choice district, not just for this region, but from outside of it.
Well,
If
and a
I'm
lot
moving
of
from
homes
somewhere
are
else.
sort of destination homes rather than starter homes, for example.
Well, yeah, exactly. But that's my point, though. So you might have, too, a number of executives and executive level, too, who are more often moving. Like I said, the dynamics in Lower Marion are fairly unique, considering both that you're very close to the city, have transit access and all these other amenities that many other suburban towns don't have, even though they have your similar like housing types, But, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So my other question is, so on your private enrollment slide, in 2000, it was 38.7. In 2010, it was 37.6. In 2015, it was 28.3.
Yeah.
And you said that the typical average in Montgomery County is 18 to 22.
Well, that's what we've observed in doing other studies,
Right.
of which we've done most of the county.
Right. So
Yeah.
if we were to drop our private school enrollment down to 22, do you have an idea of how many students that would be?
How many more students you mean resulting?
Yeah, I mean, could that, I'm wondering, I mean, you're talking about an increase of 918 or something like that with only, a small percentage of that, or a minor piece of that being new construction from
Yeah.
multifamily. So where are the others coming from? And I'm wondering if we use 22% as our floor for private school
What that
enrollment.
would mean in terms of absolute number of students.
Is there a way you could?
Well,
is
there
that
is
a
math
number
that we
you
could
can
do to
figure
try
out?
and figure that out, yes. Well, I can't do it right
No,
this
I don't
second in
mean
front of you.
right this second.
But
I'd be-
yeah, if
I'd
that's
be
something.
curious to see.
I just want to say, I was actually incorrect on the birth data. The birth data is not going, I mean,
That's what I was-
it varies slightly, but it's not on
Yeah,
a downward
that's what I
trend.
said,
So I
the
still-
last one is, the last
higher.
one is high.
So I'm still trying to
So-
understand in the model, what do you think is causing?
The last 2 years have had lower.
Have had lower, yeah. Yeah, the last 2 years have been lower.
But the projections are high.
Well, but
I mean, birth,
also,
I mean,
Lower
birth.
classes.
Yeah.
but also, if people are holding their homes for 15 years
Yes.
or 20 years, then the housing turnover also might slow down because of, I mean,
I see what you're saying, that people are more likely to stay in the
It's really hard.
home.
I mean, anecdotally, in my neighborhood,
Yeah.
when we moved in, when my kids were little, we were the first people to move in with little kids.
Yeah.
Everybody else was retired or their kids were in college or whatever.
Trendsetter.
And now, there's lots of children
Mm-hmm.
under the age of 5. Like, I can walk down the street.
Well,
Every
then
time I go out
anecdotally, then
and
it
I
would
see
seem that
more children,
you
I
might
think,
be
this
more
is great,
farther
right?
along in that cycle then.
I understand. So
Yeah.
anecdotally, I can see that, but I don't want to use anecdotal evidence. I'm trying to understand what it is because we don't have a sense of what's causing the stabilization for the elementary school level right now. I'd like to have a sense of what was causing that.
yeah, I don't know that there's any way to figure that out. But just before you jump in, can we, if I could just get that number, if you could figure it out, if we were
Sure.
at the 22%, thanks.
George, the actual births over the next 5 years, up or down, generally?
What's projected that we don't know is the stat.
Well, not that, I mean, the ones, I'm sorry, so for,
The 5 years.
The 5 year.
Over the last 5 years.
Can you
yeah.
please you're not going to be on tape unless you're, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know that answer in my head, I really don't.
Because I'm
But
looking
we
at
use
it,
the same numbers.
it doesn't look like the actual numbers were going down, they were just stabilizing.
Stable.
So you're getting a relatively stable birth line. And since the in-migration has been heavy at the secondary, you're saying a stability at the elementary and an increase in the secondary. Did I oversimplify that?
Well, no, and you're saying, I think the same thing that Dan said, it's kind of like in the model.
Yeah.
And when there's no very distinctive reason, it's so easy to say, oh, plus new housing, that obviously is going to have an impact. We know that. Or a recession in housing. But this is all of the ordinary, the myriad factors that go into it are just telling us through the model that we are coming to an area or a period of stabilization in that elementary enrollment. And we can't. We cannot necessarily give you the three factors that are
Yeah.
causing that.
Right. Are there any other questions? Does anybody have any other questions right now?
Well, if you have more
Yes.
too, you can always address it, to
Well,
us.
what I'd like to do now is open up an opportunity for people in the public to ask questions. So if you could please come and sign up with Ms. LaPera. And I think everybody needs to say who they are and generally where they live, and there's a 3-minute limit. Thank you. Could everybody who'd like to speak sign in now? And then we'll close it.
Dazzled with footwork around here with those numbers. Ruth Jenkin, Wynwood. Every morning, I take a long walk, around 4 miles throughout the neighborhood, and I pass Thomas Wynn apartment houses. I pass apartment houses on Montgomery Avenue, and all of those houses have children waiting for buses to come. And I think that we are underestimating the number of children that are in these apartment buildings. And I think what's happened also is that these apartment buildings are not paying school taxes. They are paying a tax that is assumed that they have a certain number of children or not a certain number of children. So what's happening is the single-family homes are paying the taxes for the multiple children that are in the apartment buildings unless there is an adjustment made. The only way to make an adjustment is to have a census in those apartment buildings, either through the buses or through identifying by apartment building how many children are there at any particular time. So that's my comment on that. I also have another comment on advanced placement classes. It's come to my attention that there are no substitutes for advanced placement classes. When the teacher is out, the students don't go to class. I've been told by several students that they don't replace the AP teachers. I'm curious about that. And I was also curious about the bonuses that are paid to teachers. When you talk about the contract, what constitutes a bonus and why does one get a bonus? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. Next, please.
Hi, Jen Kelly, Penn Valley. To your point about elementary levels stabilizing, if we're spreading out new students from new units across all grades, and if the birth rate is stable, then when you say it's built into the model, that has to mean that birth B to 1 or B to K, K to 1 is decreasing or stabilizing, which I'm wondering if that isn't reflective of something that's happening in Philadelphia, and the extent to which people are moving over. And is there any way to bake some of the trends that we are seeing in the city into what's happening here? Or is there a correlation there that should be examined? That was just one thought. And then the other thing, based on the 2015 data, if the private school percentage dropped to 22%, that would be 700 students, because that's just math. So, thanks.
Thank you. Will you be able to hold those questions, to be able to address our questions at the end? Okay, great, thank you. You can go ahead.
Hi, Sharon Weinstein from Penguin. I noticed in the paper the other day that it said that the new tax code that might be voted in will take away, I guess, mortgage tax breaks, and that might reduce significantly the house sales. Would that dramatically change the population growth?
We'll just, if you can just ask your questions, and then we'll try at the
Okay.
end to
All
answer.
right,
Do you
that's
have
the
no
question.
more? Oh, okay. All right, thanks. It's a good question.
Adrian Seltzer, Lower Merion. How did you guys, if you didn't, did you guys have these reports earlier? Where did you get the numbers to use for this facilities report that was from 2 weeks ago? It looked like you had current numbers, and I'm not sure. And I'm really concerned about not being able to get these reports before the meeting. Hold on 1 second. I just went, of course it decides to close. Thank you very much for the hard work you guys did. There's a message on your message machine for me. You can ignore it. I'm kind of dismayed that this information isn't made available to the public before the meeting. Having this information would help us follow the reports that were given tonight, give us a better perspective of the questions of the board, because we don't have copies like you do. And also, it would also help us ask some intelligent questions, because we would have a chance to review this before our limited little 3 minutes that we have before you. I mean, Dr. Van Lynch told me after the meeting, when the facilities and demographic meetings were announced, that she put this demographic meeting after the facilities meeting because one of the presenters was not available. And which, understandably, I don't have an issue with that. But it's surprising that after I filed a Freedom of Information request, I was told that the extent or nature of my request to get these reports precluded an administrative response within the initial time period, and that they needed more time to produce them. I called up Montgomery County Planning Commission and spoke with one of the authors, who said he was sorry he could not get me this study without the permission of the district. This goes to a previous point I've made in other meetings. Why aren't these made available to the public before the meeting? The excuse is that you're too busy to get them done earlier, or getting these reports outside your job description, or you're continually revising them up to the last minute, which shows a lack of time management and getting your assignments in on time. An irony not lost on me is that you have teachers on staff that teach this stuff. Would a teacher take excuses from this, from a student?
Mrs. Seltzer, I'm sorry, your time is up. And actually, I noticed that you came in late because we addressed this before you came in, but I'll ask Mr. Copeland to address it again. But we're going to answer all of the questions at the same time. So thank you.
Sam?
Sam Catania, Harrington High School. I'm a 10th grade student. I'd just like to start by thanking the presenters. They were, HHS TV, which is the group I'm working with, has been covering the issue of enrollment growth for a few years, and, we definitely learned quite a few more things tonight. And I'd like to thank the board also for their good questions on the issue. We were taking some good notes. Just my big question is, it was certainly new information to me that the elementary schools are stabilizing, and I was wondering if this is new information to the board. And then as a follow-up to that, would stabilization in the elementary schools lead to future stabilization in middle and high school levels? Or does enrollment change, like students that were enrolled in private schools then enroll in public at the middle school and high school levels? So is there an answer to that question? And so is there an effect on one another? And that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Sam. Okay, then we can start addressing some of these questions, perhaps you would like to take or the two of you would like, how would you like to do this?
I'll go down my notes. First of all, let me address Mrs. Jenkins' issues. In terms of the substitutes, I can't speak specifically about any particular subject, only to say that the number of substitute teachers, generally speaking, writ large in the district, is a struggle not only for Lower Merion, but is a regional and nationwide situation. Last year, we actually, either last year or the year before, we actually raised the pay to try and attract more substitutes, and we're still having a difficult time attracting folks. There's no bonus built into the contract for teachers that I'm aware of. In terms of trends from the city, would either of you like to speak to trends from the city? Can you bake into this? So, for example, there's a belief, I'll rephrase it, well, not a belief. Overall, my understanding is the population of Pennsylvania is decreasing. However, the population of Philadelphia is increasing. Is that or any other situation from Philadelphia having an impact, do you think, on Lower Merion? Whoever wants to.
I am quite sure that the in-migration to Lower Merion comes from a vast area and not just the city of Philadelphia. I think we would be wasting our time to try to put our finger in how many people have come to us just from Philadelphia. What's important is how many come to us, not where they come from.
I concur with what he said, actually. Again, we were talking about the cachet of the district and how I was saying how that there are people even outside this region who know what Lower Merion is. If you have a higher level executive or manager moving into this area, this is often a district that they will look for. So again, I agree. It'd be somewhat futile to just try and figure out how many are just coming from Philadelphia, because that is certainly not where the only growth is happening from, or in-migration is happening from. And plus, as in terms of what it's like in the city versus here as well, the city's a much larger school district too, and it has, all different areas that that have various reputations and not, and then people move within Philadelphia as well to other parts of Philadelphia. It's a hard thing to do without specific numbers that we have, and you can get migration numbers to a degree. It can be very difficult between specific places from the census, but I don't know how valuable that would actually be to the study.
Yeah, I think, though, that the issue is if in fact we're seeing a higher percentage of folks who begin in the city and then for schools or whatever other reason decide to move out, and that trend continues, it might be interesting to at least know. I'm fascinated to know if either one of you have any issues with the tax code. Got a couple myself, but any thoughts as to what that may do?
Well, little we already know, but I assume we're talking about things like not being able to deduct taxes on property taxes that we might pay to the state or local municipalities. Surely that will have a change. I think people will be very upset in the beginning, and probably stubbornly we will find some purchasing decreases and that sort of thing, and then after time they will buckle their belt and say, well, we really wanted one anyway, and we just have to sort of, everybody, it's the dream to have your own home ownership, and ultimately we'll get used to it, and it will go back to normal. But of course it will have, I think, in the first few years, some impact. Yeah.
I'm not buying that, George, but okay.
It would likely have some impact on both the price of housing as well as just the actual turnover of it. But again, it's hard to quantify that without actually knowing, number one, what's going to be in the final bill, what's going to actually be included, as both different versions need to be reconciled, and they are very different. So what will stay in terms of mortgage interest tax deduction and SALT deductions, we really can't speak to right now, and therefore really can't give much of a concerted answer.
I did read somewhere that housing prices would drop about 10% to accommodate that, but that's neither here nor there. In terms of the reports, as I had indicated in the beginning, we do not generally release reports until the board has determined, has accepted them and accepted them as final. We heard a couple of examples throughout tonight that the board members wanted something included in the report. We found that, so for instance, over the last couple of weeks, I know MCPC included some tracking data on the Choice District. That was new. I heard some new things tonight, and so that's what we do. The other remarks I'm not going to go into. I don't think there's anything wrong with changing presentations at the last minute if you find that there was something that would be more helpful to the public. In terms of stabilizing, I don't think I think last year the board also heard that elementary numbers were going to be stabilizing, but then when the new year comes, children come with it in an unstabilizing way. And so I guess it's something we're going to have to trend. But I think we heard that last year at the same time in terms of elementary numbers stabilizing.
Bob, there was one other question that Ms. Jenkins asked about the multifamily not paying taxes.
Oh, well, they would argue they do. They would argue that they pay their taxes through their rents. There's no way that I'm aware of to sort of deal with another kind of property tax. What we don't have that some municipalities have is an EIT, or an earned income tax. If you had an EIT, I'm not suggesting we do. I'm simply suggesting that if you did, it would better capture people who live in the community but don't directly pay property taxes.
Right, but multifamily properties are assessed by the county just like everything else, and are paid the same tax rate as a single-family home does, just on a bigger number. And theoretically, that number covers the students that
Sure.
come. So it's just like with houses, you don't go house by house by house and say, all right, well, this house has 2 children in it, so the taxes are here, and this. It's a flat rate based on the assessed value of the house. That multifamily, and then they, as you said, pay it through the rent.
Sure. In fact, I think Mr. Fetterman had asked me something about that along those lines, and I looked up, I think it was Royal Athena, and they're currently paying about $800 and something thousand in taxes, school taxes. But with 40 or 42 students at $20,000 a student, it's costing about $800,000. So if more students come per the taxes, and that's true for homes too. A family of 5, for instance, isn't assessed differently than a family of 2.
Okay, well, I'll remind everyone that our next
There was one additional question asked by your student relative to if in fact elementary does turn out to be stabilizing, does that transfer then on into the middle school and the high school? And the answer is yes, it does. As you.
But at the same time, we always pick up students at that level as
Yes, you
well.
do.
So
Yes,
it
you do.
doesn't- Yeah,
But that's
it will be
5 to 10 years out.
Yes.
yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks. Did we miss any other questions? Are we good? Okay. Well, I just want to remind everyone that our next regular business meeting is December 18th at 8 p.m. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.